Good evening and welcome to Take Two. Hope you guys are doing well wherever you're at. Here with Brian. Glad you guys can be here with us or tune in later and catch up. And want to remind you that our space is open if you'd like to be a part of the conversation. We're getting here at 6:30 and kind of talking a little bit beforehand, and then we go on live at 7. But we do take questions as well during our time here. So if you have questions that you would like to pose, you can send them in here on YouTube, or you can come on down and shout them out at us, and we'd be happy to respond in that way. Remind you also that we do have our meetings Sunday mornings, 10 a.m. here, as well as on YouTube Live. That's continuing. And we've got a few other things happening. Brian, why don't you talk about Common Ground a little bit and what that is? I mentioned it Sunday. But kind of share what's going on.
Common Ground was an idea that I think is an extension of things that we were all already doing. So we wanted to have a hub other than maybe our own social medias, a central hub where we could start inviting people if they were looking for an event that was. Me and Jordan had a talk, and we're like, there's a bar or a club you could go to every day of the week if you wanted to, but there's not a place you can gather and create and commune and converse. So we're like, what if there was an event every day of the week? You could still go to the bar, but you would have a choice to come to an event that was like more relational. And so that was birthed from that conversation. Oddly, or coincidentally enough, we all were kind of already doing our own events, and we're opening up to the world. So starting at Genesis, anybody that is looking to host a workshop, teach a class, run an event. So far it's only been Jordan. Jordan has done Art for Artists, and I've been kind of a part of that, where artists get to show and tell. It's not an open mic. It's more of we bring a piece of art, get a chance to talk about it, and we listen and talk about that and share that space with other artists. You have to be an artist to be a part of that. We ask that you are. The Pact was his philosophy class and critical thinking class. I had that last night. It was awesome. He has also did like a hike. He has a botanical garden meeting coming up here on the 21st of August. Also, we have a gal who's been actually during the pandemic has been doing Bible journaling workshops. And if you don't know what that is, I didn't know what it was. You're basically creating art inside of your Bible. So she has like almost like what is it called? Scrapbooking. It's like a scrapbooking vibe, and some paintings involved, and you're writing inside of the margins of your Bible. It's been really successful. She's doing well. Her event is called Our Right Life. That's her organization as well, Writing Inside of the Margins, and it is on the 28th of August. Me and Nikki Boy are doing this thing where we're opening up the Genesis building. Also not an open mic. We're just inviting creatives, because we hate creating at the house, because there's like a bed and a refrigerator and TV and just things that will stop us from creating. So Genesis Works has been a huge blessing to us. So we want to invite all other artists to come, just bring their sketchbook, bring their empty canvas, their journal, Nikki Boy's gonna be playing some music. I'm bringing some snacks. Also not an open mic. We're just gonna be sharing space. So if you're an artist, on the 28th, and all of that could be found on Common Ground Family on IG, on Instagram. And we have a website that I created. It's called commongroundevents.org. And that's going to be the one that's going to go out to the masses, and anybody that reaches
the world.
out. To the world. So you can go to any city in the world and just come to a Common Ground
Exactly.
event. That's the goal. So
I was telling my daughter Lauren about this. She goes, "So it's kind of like a dating app for artists."
what?
Like, yeah.
How is that? Oh, that's right.
It kind of is. Swipe right? You just.
Yeah, and I don't know if you ever dated artists. Don't do it. That's why they don't exist. Artists don't want to date other artists. They just kill each other and write poems about each other all day.
They make some killer music after.
Right.
Anyway, all that's to be said is we got things happening. Connect with us somehow. We want to connect again. At a time when the pandemic has really taken away the ability to connect, I think, in meaningful ways. Connection isn't just coming and listening to someone. It's coming and participating with people. And so we're doing the summer series. We met at my house last Saturday. Is the next one at your house?
No, next one is at
The Borjas, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So with that, Mary and Adelio Borjas, we'll get the information for you on that, but that's happening in August, and then yours is later in the month?
I think ours is
Or
early
is it
September.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll get you up to date on the other ones that are happening. But there are opportunities for us to connect because we really need to connect. It's important for us. If you feel unsafe still, I know that the Delta variant is affecting a lot of people. Please be safe. We want you to follow your conscience, and we want to do what we can to make sure everyone is safe to whatever degree possible. So anyway, that being said, take two is where we talk about what Sunday's talk was about. And Sunday, I spoke a continuing series on the politics of Jesus, and I talked about the politics of salt and light. So that's what it was kind of about. Brian, I'm going to throw it at you, though, where you want to ask questions, direct, or get clarification.
Yeah. I wrote some stuff down. I started because I think you had an idea. I think you've growing up in the church, you hear a salt and light passage at least once a year, and
Yeah.
talk about it and how it's supposed to preserve and what light does. And I just started like really making a list of things that salt and light do, separate from preserving and taste. I think taste is not really like always a thing that they talk about, but I
Yeah.
think it's more like adding flavor. I add fertilize. Light is what I didn't. One thing I never heard is like it warms. Like it covers. So it's like to think about how the other things that light and salt do, and open to the conversation of like making that bigger,
Yeah.
rather than trying to narrow it down. I mean, constantly that's what we're doing. We're like taking a concept, making it huge, bringing it back. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, I think I mentioned some of the ways that salt was used because it was so readily available because of the Dead Sea. And I think maybe that was one of Jesus' point is like, this is something that's so useful in so many ways. And maybe that's how we are supposed to be, right? We're supposed to be useful in whatever ways we can be to whatever people are there, and being open to that, right?
and he was talking about something that was so readily available. So it's like using the language of the thing they speak. I mean, we would probably not say that now. We
Yeah.
would say, like, I don't know, what's something that
Wi-Fi.
like Wi-Fi, like
You are the Wi-Fi.
You're like the Wi-Fi of the world. And I think that's cool because
Yeah.
it lets you know that it's he's speaking still parabolically. I don't know if that's the right word, but also like relevantly. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I think that is very important. I think throughout this whole teaching of Jesus, that is relevant, especially to the people from the nation of Israel.
Yeah.
I mentioned the passages where he talks about light, where it was referenced to Israel. Israel was supposed to be this light to the peoples, to the nation. And I think taking that image that these people would have known, because they grew up reading Torah, they grew up reading the scriptures, knowing it, studying it, kind of like our kids do at Sunday school, and they hear, the different stories of Noah or, David and Goliath. They grew up hearing these stories, and so hearing Jesus speak about the light of the world, they would immediately thought of, that's what Isaiah says.
Yeah.
And that's in reference to the nation.
Right.
And now he's talking to this group of people, and he's taking what was the nation and making it his disciples. And so there's a transfer there that they would have immediately gotten, which would have been, again, a pretty astounding thing to them to hear that, we're the new nation, right? Because that's kind of what he's...
Do you think that was surprising to them, or do you think that would like threw them back, or do you think just like today there would be a mix of people feeling entitled and a mix of people feeling humbled? What is it?
Yeah. I imagine there was a lot of emotion, that varied. I think the leaders, from the religious leaders, to them, it was an abomination. It was heresy. I think to the people, it was empowering and inviting. them to be a part of this story instead of just bystanders watching it. Um, and so I think you had that, everything in between probably with those things, which is why Jesus, stirred things up and ruffled feathers and was crucified ultimately, because he did push into the power establishment and said, I'm taking this and giving it to these people. And remember, these people weren't the cream of the crop, right? These were the sick and, the people who were paralytics, and they were just your common blue collar workers. They weren't people who were as studied as them, who knew, the law like they did. And so taking this identity and responsibility away from the leaders who kind of oversaw Israel and gave it to these people, I think was pretty,
Yeah.
in your face kind of a thing.
Yeah, yeah.
It was really like, what are you doing? You can't talk like that.
Right.
Don't you know who we are?
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. So, which I think was his whole point.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I also like how you said that you are that, you're not acting like salt and light. It's not, it wasn't a metaphor. It was like,
You need to
like,
become salt.
yeah, you don't need to become, you're not gonna be salt and light.
Yeah.
It was in a future talk. I thought that the reason that's powerful, because I love stuff like that when you kind of talk about pretense and like what and when and direction of who you're speaking about. I mean, I think it's so important because it has to give you ownership, and it makes you, it should make you think about all the things salt and light could be to the world, and I mean, even not thinking about that they wrote that all the way back then, and it'd be impossible to almost kill light or salt, like it was like like salt still exists very normally today, and light obviously, but it's like two very common things that aren't going anywhere anytime soon, that like he didn't give like you're a rhino and like
You're a bull in a china shop.
right, yeah. So I think there are all some things like to be very like intentional about his choices.
And it was, again, it's passive, right? These
Yeah.
are passive things that just are. I think one of the things that Jesus is doing is he's focusing the whole idea of what the kingdom looks like, right? He talked about the kingdom he first shared it with this group of people, and then he shared those, beatitudes. The blessed are, the poor in spirit, those who mourn, those who are hungering and thirsting for righteousness, the meek, the merciful, peacemakers, all those that he goes through is his fine-tuning the lens to say, if this is the characteristics in you, this is what the kingdom looks like. And the kingdom looks like this because of what these situations develop, which I think is important, because there's grief and suffering, with this group of people who were sick, paralytic, demon-possessed, poor, being used by all the different systems, right? The religious system, the political system, and everything in between, even the revolting systems that were trying to, get rid of Rome, or those who were not happy with Rome or the temple system. These people were just in the way of all of the things that were going on. These were like, the common people who were kind of like us now, having to be in the crossfires of, Fox and CNN, right? We're hearing all this stuff and we're like, okay, so what is the truth of the vaccines and this virus and, political system and parties and all these things? And the people are just in the middle. And when that produces grief and when that produces suffering, there is a remnant that is still faithful and still hopeful. And I think Jesus is fine-tuning his lens to that. Those who are dealing with all these things, who have these characteristics, who are grieving, suffering, but are still faithful to want to be a part of what God is going to do and are hopeful. And I think Jesus is like really shining the light on that. And I think that can be found today too. And I think that's what he's looking for, which makes it what we want to be, Yeah.
And how what's the call to what's the call there then? You know, like if we, because I get what you're saying, but I guess well, I ask you this all the time, and I'm like, what if someone was listening to this and for the first time and understands the concept of salt and light and sees why that's a beautiful metaphor, and how those people could be blessed in the idea that Jesus is saying it, but like, what's the application? What would you tell somebody that was like, so how do I bring this into my life? How do I strive, and how do I make my way to that? You know.
I think it is, again, being mindful of the character of Christ, because that's what all those blessings show, right? They're that mosaic that's put together that really looks like who he is. Even like we spoke about, the theirs is the kingdom of heaven is in between, or all those beatitudes are in between. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven, and so all these make up really a common theme and blessing. I think acting in that way, where we are merciful, being peacemakers, right? These are the characteristics that we want to have within us, and we want to develop, and we want to, try and cultivate within our own lives. And so, again, it's not like you have to do these things to be blessed. It's like, no, if those things are in your life, congratulations, you're there, right? And if those things aren't in your life, what's missing? Why do I not have mercy in my life? What is it that's making me not so merciful? Maybe it is watching the news, or hearing an agenda from a certain group of people, and it's causing me to be less of a peacemaker and more of a instigator, right? And how do I develop this idea of making peace with people, not preserving peace, but making it happen? How can I be a participant in these kinds of things? I think that's when we become or are salt and light.
Right.
Those things are just by themselves in their nature salt and light. They don't have to do anything more than that, because that is the example.
And that's a good segue into what you were talking about, the 5-minute gospel talk versus the individual obligation versus the collective character.
Yeah.
Could you expand on that a little bit? Because I know like, that spoke to me, because it's like, I understand. Well, that to me was like the revelation of the whole thing. That was kind of like if you can separate I have to be this versus I am this, and if you could turn like the light towards like you have no choice you to not be what you are, kind of thing, and he's saying you are already. He called you. It's like, then I'm not. How do I step into it? It's like that inheritance talk. Like, was it you that was telling me that the Rockefeller you said on your last thing? Yeah, it's like that was cool, because it was like, oh, once you understand that it's already there, how do I become it? How do I step into that inheritance?
Live as if it's a reality.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a huge difference, right? I mean, from that individual obligation where I have to tell someone about this so that I can be salt, or I can be the light. I have to do this to become this, and I am obligated to this, as opposed to this is a collective people who are this because it is their inheritance, because they are people who are poor in spirit, because they are people who suffer for Christ's sake or in Christ's image. I think that's a totally different picture. And what I thought of when I thought about, the individual obligation and the things that I used to think, I need to share my faith with somebody, and the conversations could be so short and shallow, right? It'd just be, I'm telling them, I'm giving them the 5 points, or, the 4 spiritual laws, or I'm the road to Romans, and I've got this little pathway. Here's this, and if I do it well, I can do it in a short amount of time, right? Because I'm very clear, and there it is. There's the gospel, and all I have to do is like a sales pitch, right? As the other one is, this is who I am. You can look at me anytime and get the flavor that's needed and see what needs to be seen, because there's a light shining on it, and it's my life. And then I can journey in this life with you anytime, anywhere, and the conversation can last years, and it can be moments, it can be days, it's relational.
Right.
And it's
That's the
not
key.
just me, it's a lot of us, right? So it's not a responsibility that you have to do this. Otherwise, something, you're responsible for that person's soul or whatever. Oh gosh.
That might be the part of the salt metaphor, that it's not a rock, like we're not the rocks of the earth, or like there's a lot, like there's,
Yeah.
it's uncountable, unimaginable. And it takes more than one piece of salt to be noticed, in a sense,
Yeah.
like you can't put a grain of salt in your eggs, and so that whole $5, that thing they give out the piano player. Yeah, if you don't listen to Sam Stock, listen to it. But it's like he's talking about the piano player, and everybody's like donating to his GoFundMe, and it was $5 here, $5 there from all over the world, made $75,000, and it was like salt was that image for me. It was like it was all of our salt, like flavoring the
Yeah.
yeah the thing.
And that's an exciting thing. I mean, and that's where I think the idea of hope comes in, right? Faithfulness and hope. We're faithfulness to the cause of Christ, even though, there's so much resistance. I feel right now that the church is really at a pivotal point. I think it's being divided, and I think that that's sad but good. If the division opens the door so that this conversation can be had with more people, right? Because a lot of people are not seeing salt; they're getting a stench, right? They're seeing judgment attitude. They're saying you have to either join us or our party, or you can't do anything with us. You have to either see all the vaccination as evil and mark of the beast, or you have to be on the other side, and if you're not vaccinated, you're an evil person, and you've got this battle going on that's drawing lines and dividing sides, and I think none of them look like salt or light, right? And I think that this is the opportunity where the character of Christ can show up and be that, in this time. And I hope Genesis will be that. I know in Genesis we have people of various political persuasions, and I love that. Different ethnicities, and I hope that just continues. I hope we look like the world, right? I hope that what happens in here looks like what's happening out there, with this idea of the character of Christ being the underlying theme above our other things, right? So I am a follower of Christ. I want the character of Christ to be a part of my life before I identify as an American or a Republican or a Democrat, right? I want the character of Christ to be what identifies me, so that every other thing that is identified can have the flavor of Christ and be the illumination of, I am a person who's merciful, I am a person who makes peace, I am a person who mourns, I am a person, what kind of government would be made by people who have those characteristics? It's not going to be one that's oppressive. It's not going to be one that's demanding. It's going to be one that is empathetic, concerned, and loving. And I think that's important, to see that shine up in all of us.
It's funny, we did that words workshop yesterday, and one of the words that when I walked in, they were already talking about it, awful, and I was like in awe and full. Like, it started as a good thing, like you're in awe, full of awe, and then slowly it turned into what, like awe, and then two L's on the full, and then it somehow made its way into terrible, and like bad, and then that word, it was like a switch. And as far as like the word salt, I don't know if you heard this term, salty. Like, it's a very like right now term,
Yeah.
like, oh, they're salty, like
it's like they're too much.
or no, they're bitter,
Oh,
like
okay.
they're like, if you're salty, you're mad at something I did,
Okay.
that, and it's not like you're mad at me because I did something wrong. You might be salty because I said something that exposed you or something, but it was like, it's weird how like the evolution of words,
Yeah.
even now, like, because we're talking it as a good thing, and how anything could be taken as like a, but like how they had to make a new word for awful, or to change the meaning back to what it was meant for. And so that for awful they turned it into awesome, and then and salt as salty. There's like like there's like it's weird because in the basketball team there's like a lot of things
Yeah.
thoughts I had in my mind, but slang,
Mhm.
but there's a lot of words that could mean separate things, and how salt happens to be one of those things that's like has so many different meanings.
Yeah.
Yeah, good and bad.
And it's interesting too, because when Jesus says, um, George Costanza, manure equals newer. um, if salt loses its flavor, what good is it, right? If it loses its saltiness, I think one translation says, and the idea is if it loses the character of what it is, then it's good for nothing, right? And we don't want to be people who lose the character of Christ and are good for nothing. And that's what I think I see happening in different ways. That's what I think I saw happening in my own life, where I was all about being right, having good theology, but I didn't have the character of Christ. I wasn't salt with flavor. And I think that the world sees that and is not going to be drawn to something that does not have that flavor, right? Someone who wants to be right and prove you wrong, it's not really appealing. But someone who is merciful, someone who is kind, someone who is going out of their way to be helpful, someone who's, the idea of meek, who doesn't use their position for their own advantage, those things I think attract. And I think that's the flavor that Jesus is referring to. And then again, we want to see, okay, is my life filled with that flavor? Do I have that within me, or is it useless?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times knowledge puffs up, right? But love builds up.
Right.
And so having that kind of distinguishing, understanding who we're going to be, it's important.
And like it made me think about like if salt loses its characteristic, like because the salt, that's the only thing. I mean, it's if it loses its saltiness, then it's kind of it. And if we're supposed to find our identity in Christ, if he is our characteristic in a sense, we have our individual characteristics, but if we are his and he lives in us, it's like almost like saying that if we lose our characteristic, if we lose the thing that makes us us, we become next to useless, or we're unable to show that light, even though like it's like it's separate. You had said something. You said like, and you said it during the time where you're talking about. You said push an agenda for God. As you were talking about people having their like collective characteristics or individual obligation, you said something like instead of pushing on your like obligation to your agenda, that's what you said, your agenda of God onto people. I guess I know exactly what you mean, but I also know that like you might get an email or something because you're like, if we don't have an agenda for God, what are we doing here, kind of thing. So maybe clarify or build on that, like why is having an agenda for God not being salt and light?
Okay.
Or what you meant by that?
Yeah. No, that's good. That does need clarification. I think Christ had an agenda. And I think it's important that we understand his agenda and allow that to be ours and not have it reversed. And what I meant is sometimes we can have an agenda where we feel that this is the way things need to be, and now I'm going to take the words of Christ and put them into my agenda. The difficult thing is most people don't see they have an agenda. They just assume it's God's agenda. That's why they make it theirs, right? And the way you can tell if it's your agenda or if it's Christ's agenda is to go through each of those blessings and see if that is a part of your agenda. If your agenda does not help the poor in spirit, if it does not understand those who mourn, or if your agenda is not meek, right, has a position of power and uses it to your advantage, well, then your agenda is not Christ's agenda. If your agenda is not making peace, but is causing division, then it's not the agenda of Christ, right? And so I think those blessings are kind of the litmus test to see if our agenda is the same as Christ's agenda.
Right.
And I think that's one of those things where we have to do that self-examination, because the first truth we have to tell is the truth about ourselves, right? And that truth has to be filtered through this, the character we see in this beatitude. It's almost like if you were to look at some, I have to say some because I don't want to, blast everyone with this, but you look at some churches and you would think that they read the Beatitudes and said, let's do the exact opposite. I mean, really, it's about us having power. It's about us having authority. It's about us putting our agenda on others. It's about us, boasting in what we have, boasting in what we do, boasting in who we are. I'm a child of God. I'm a child of the King, and have this. I've been blessed. I mean, you can go into the wealth and prosperity, doctrines and things like that. I mean, there's so many places where it almost seems like this is exact opposite of what Jesus was saying.
Yeah. I also feel like we know where it's coming from. It's coming from like a place of pride. On the Instagram the other day, I was talking about like gluttony, and gluttony not being necessarily about food. Did you watch it?
I haven't seen it.
Like me, my Mike, and my wife Alex were gluttony being an excess, so Alex gave a really good example, or a really good definition. She says when you perverse the original design, that's a form of gluttony. So like if talking about food, we might say the original design is for energy. You can eat for pleasure, but when you put it in the wrong order, you have a tendency to abuse something. And I think in that sense, the church and that boasting, we understand that it's coming from it started as a healthy place of pride for God, for the church that the building, meaning this place they started, and that people came, and now we're bigger than we were, and we're an army of God, these kind of things. And then you could turn that into now an unhealthy, a gluttonous approach to how you present your church, how you present, and once it enters gluttony, we've examined that the original design almost becomes useless. It almost turns opposite. You can get sick from the food.
Yeah.
You can die from the food, and you could feel this in time, money, your social media. It no longer becomes what it was intended for, and now you've perverse to the point where it's working against the original design, which is like, so the church becomes, now it's working against itself. And I think that's like kind of what we're seeing a little bit of.
Yeah, and that kind of was a comparison I made too, like Jesus talking to Israel and telling the nation, I'm giving this to the people. Gosh, I always forget to turn that off. I'm giving the responsibility to these people, right? Because you are not handling the responsibility. If we were to take it in our time, Jesus would be talking to the church and saying, you are not acting like Christ. And so I need to find the people who will carry the character, right? And I think it's important that we understand that, because we can distance ourselves from, even that idea of, oh, we're not gluttonous, and because we're making it one thing, or we're blind to all that it could mean. And not realizing that when Jesus was giving most of his woes, like in Luke, or most of his condemnation, it was to the religious people. Right? Which would be who in our time? Well, it would be the church. It would be the church leaders. It would be those who have authority over people and how they're using their authority over people. And again, look at a lot of the leaders we've seen in church, the big names that are out there, Ravi Zacharias and others that, have been in the headlines with abuse, sexual abuse, and there's people who have been, embezzling money, people who have been, abusing people who are there, people in their congregation. It's so fitting to the story that Jesus was condemning the Pharisees and the religious leaders at that time that it fits right into our time. Who do we think he's talking to? Right? He's talking to us. But it's easy for us to go, oh, he's talking to those, Pharisees, and not saying that his warning about hypocrisy was to us,
Right.
that we would not be like that, and it's too easy to distance ourselves, and that's why the first truth has to be the truth we tell to ourselves. We have to look at these things and look at our lives and say, how do I fit in that? Where am I? Am I meek? Or do I use my position for my own advantage?
I think that's a really good place to start too, as like someone that's coming into faith and learning who God is, and then reading the stories of Jesus, and then sitting here and like saying, am I these things? Am I the Beatitudes? Am I salt and light? Who am I? Because part of, I think, the problem of us getting away from the salt and light, there's like this ownership of teaching the unknown as like solid truth, or
Yeah.
we
Lack
growing
of
up
humility.
in the church,
Yeah.
we're like, we took the mystery out of, and we say, well, we're walking in faith, or we might use these kind of words, but there's just a certain level of like, I've even heard this come out of people's mouth when I have these conversations, where they say something like, that is, they'll say like the absolute truth or something like that, like, the Bible is absolute truth. Yeah, but we happen to be reading the same thing, and we have a different idea about it. So let's talk about that rather than calling what you believe absolute truth.
Yeah.
And I think that is the hard part, and I think this is where we're getting away from the salt and light thing. The meek, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, just definitely the character, right? I mean, if we can't have a conversation about our disagreements, right?
Right.
If we can't have conflict in a way that is healthy, then it's going to become very unhealthy, right? Like war is the absence of conflict, right? Peter Rollins. If we're unable to talk about our disagreements because we're so adamant that we're right, again, we start to see this attitude, like you said, pride. There's this lack of humility, this unwillingness to learn, and it happens on both sides. It can happen with people who are fundamentalist conservative, and it can happen with people who are liberal progressive. Each one can be adamant and not hear or respect the other person. And I think the character of Christ and the politics of Jesus is something that shows up in either of those, right? And that's one of the things I mentioned. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. The politics of Jesus can find you there and be a light and salt in that community that you find, because of its nature to other people, because of these attitudes, these characteristics that show up. And whenever they show up, people are drawn to them, because they are disarming. A person who's merciful, people might say, oh, they'll take advantage of you, whatever. Yeah, maybe so. I mean, we could go into that. That's a kind of a different trail. Of merciful doesn't mean, gullible. But a person who's merciful is not going to be a threat, is not going to come across as overbearing. They're gonna come across as someone who is wanting to elevate someone else. Showing mercy says, I think you're important. I want to see you I think more of you than where you're at. And gosh, that's just the kind of thing that, how do you argue with that?
Can't. There's no, like they say, there's like no law against these things. Love, like there's like, you can't, and paper, rock, scissors, that love wins, like there's no, all right. So the last thing I put was the church was supposed to point to the kingdom. How do we know? Yeah. And how do we know?
Again, we know because it's filled with people who look like the Beatitudes instead of people who look like the type A personalities, right? We're so celebrity minded in our culture. Um, we relish people who have that spotlight, and we idolize people like that. And they're the ones who get the job done, and they're the ones who, are eloquent in their speech, and they're the ones who, look, the part. Um, those are the things that we are drawn to, but the kingdom looks like those people that Jesus was talking to. And so, how do we know if the church is pointing to the kingdom? Does it look like these people? Does it look like, again, these poor in spirit? Does it look like those who are hurting? And the four characteristics that I pointed out, it was grief, suffering, faithfulness, and hope, right? The church is filled with grief. It's part of who we are because we care, because we love. And if you love someone, you will grieve, right? You will grieve when they are sick. You will grieve when they do something that's detrimental to their lives. You will grieve because of the injustices you see in the world. You'll grieve because of the division you see in the church because of politics. You'll grieve because of all these things. It suffers because it is standing in opposition to the power that is controlling. And so it suffers because of that. Jesus suffered and entrusted himself to God. 1 Peter 2 tells us, who judges justly, and we're to do the same, right? We're not supposed to try and justify ourselves, make a name for ourselves. We are people who look like the cross. We are people who care so much that we suffer because we care. And then we're faithful. We're faithful to this image of Christ and wanting to follow it, right? To pick up our cross and follow him daily. And we have hope that this is what God is looking for. This is the kingdom, right? This is what the kingdom is about, and we are going to be a part of that. And I think those things are important to understand because sometimes we feel like grief and suffering are not good, right? We think of grief and suffering as being, not like God. I forget, I think I heard someone, might have been Genesis, shared something like that on Instagram today, where we think that, if you're, a Christian, you can't be sad and you can't suffer and you can't be grieving, where, no, that's kind of a part of who Christ was, and it's a part of who we are. So I think that it's important to see those things and realize that this is what the kingdom looks like. If we're going to be the kingdom, we're going to be grieving, we're going to be suffering, we're going to be faithful and hopeful.
And the underlining tone connected to all those is like relational.
Yeah.
Like we are that, because without the relationship part, there's no way we could be grieving, right? We could be faithful. We can't do it by ourselves, And there's like that's the other part of the issue. I think we're trying to all figure it out by ourselves, and this whole like concept of being self-made and we did it, Even when you say like building a church, like we did, like I'm gonna make it, I made it, I'm gonna, and you're like, it's so counter to what the church says and what how the church was made and how Jesus was asking us to do it, like, and the examples that he gave, none of them were like, he didn't say go out by yourself and go do it now by yourself.
And I think I gave the illustration too. Look at who Jesus picked, right? 12 people who weren't the cream of the crop, right? His disciples were not the best of the best as far as, the study of the law and their schooling. They would only pick the cream of the crop to be followers and be their disciples. All the disciples were fishermen. They were doing other tasks, which mean they didn't make the cut, right? And that's who he picked, right? And then he would heal someone and said, don't tell anyone about it. They'd want to make him king, and he would get out of there, right? He did everything against what we consider normal. I mean, it's really insane what he did in our way of thinking, in our logic. Everything Jesus did was counter to how we would say to do things, even in the church today. we want to publicize things. You know, I want people to know how great our event was. You know, Jesus would say, "Oh, don't tell anyone. Oh, that was a great event. Yeah, let's not tell anyone. Right? Just keep it a secret." It's like, what? No, we need people to come, right? I mean, we have that mentality where we see, and it's not that it's wrong that you invite people to come to something, but
The order in which you put it. Yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
it's
the
just
why,
kind of
yeah.
that gluttony thing that you were talking about,
Yeah.
right? There's nothing wrong with enjoying food, but if it's just there to satisfy the wrong desires, then it can become problematic.
Yeah.
And so, you know, Jesus did things very upside down, you know.
Yeah, I remember in John, he was like talking about like there's like that doesn't matter where your name or your label, it doesn't matter where you worshipped. You know what he's looking for is like the character and that your spirit connects to your, you know, like
Yeah,
to
true
your,
worshipers
yeah,
worship
yeah,
God in spirit and in truth.
and the spirit and
Yeah.
the truth. And it's like when you start thinking about that, like you're like, where's that? You know, like let's get back to that. And we could tell people, but if that
Yeah.
part's not first, if people
Yeah.
aren't first, um, yeah, just it starts with us, man. It starts with the individual. This is all for us, you know. And we could say them, and you know, like the church, and it seems like I can't see it, and I could see it in other churches, but it's like it's all talking to us, and it's always talking to us. And if we can't, like, we have to like internalize it, own it, in our own life, and like you said, like be that, you know,
Yeah.
be live that, you know. I could see it in us, all of us. I could see it in our church, but I could also see it in other churches that I didn't think I was gonna see it in.
Yeah.
And also like finding a way to like get us back to where, you know, you could walk into any church and
Yeah.
and feel loved and
Yeah, and again, we lost this idea of the collective, right? Where this is us,
yeah,
instead of, you know, this is just me and my relationship with God. No, this is us and our relationship with God. I mean, what would happen if you couldn't read except for together? You know, what would happen if you couldn't pray except for in a collective group together? How much more would we gather, and how much more would we grow if we had to do it together? You know, we've become so individualistic, and that's again part of that politics of the world. It's all about the individual freedom, and the politics of Jesus is about the collective power, that we recognize who we are together with this attitude.
where'd you get the where'd you get the name Politics of Jesus, or why did you decide to name it that?
Um,
Trying to be edgy?
I heard a podcast,
Yeah.
and I don't know if it was that exact title. I think they said something about Jesus' politics, and just I feel like right now we are heading into more political turmoil, especially as we have certain, you know, entities in our government mandating vaccination, and you've got the anti-vaxxers who are like, you know, don't tread on me attitude. And I feel we're going to come across this huge division again. And I think, again, this is an opportunity for us to shine and have the politics of Jesus that stands like a light and salt in the middle of that division.
If you Google what political party would Jesus belong to, because it will pop up. It was like this long, because I looked it up. I'm guilty. I just want to like see like what came up. You know me, I'm very neutral
Yeah.
about these things, but it will show you different views from different sides about the way
Why
Jesus lived and what, if he's red or blue, you know, and rarely is like a middle thing.
Yeah.
And if it is a middle thing, it's like it's more enjoyable for me to read. But that part, you know, that was just asking because it just seems so like was Sam trying to make people mad, or like was I trying to? Cause he's like, that's not like, you know, because you already know someone's gonna hear about this and be like, oh, well, Sam is, you know, this, so he's probably gonna be talking about that and trying to like. But I really do love and appreciate how you are like trying to look at his politics as it pertains to the word, you know. So
I think it's so important. I think if we don't talk about this in this climate and deal with it, then we will choose a side and not deal with what can happen together. We've had a number of people leave our community because of politics. And it hurts because these are people I love. These are people who've been part of our community. But I think this is important. The temptation for me is to, I'll just do series that are easy to digest, how to have a healthy marriage, how to raise, good kids. How to, I can find these themes that everyone can say, oh yeah, we can all get on board with that. But then we still have this division, and then, pretty soon you'll have this conflict that never gets really, not that it has to be resolved, but never gets settled in that it's okay that you're here and I'm here because we're both here, right? And that's why at the end I kind of use the illustration of Corinne and my relationship. There's nothing I can say about our relationship that can tell you what our relationship really is, right? And that's true with any relationship. I can give you, okay, yeah, in the morning we have this cup of coffee and we do this, but you don't know the emotion that's there. You don't know the temperament. You don't know the history of what we've been through that has made us who we are, where we are, even where we're going, and the things that happen.
Yeah, that's part of the mystery of your love, and that's
Exactly.
And people will try to teach. Someone will teach a Corinne and Sam class and be like, "Well, Sam and Corinne did this, so they are this," And
Yeah.
you're like, "Well, there's so much more." Let's.
Yeah.
Like my buddy one time was trying to. We have these conversations about heaven and hell all the time. I don't even know how. And he's just like, "What if told my daughter, what if I didn't tell her that when she touched the stove she would burn her hand?
Mm-hmm.
Would I be a good dad? And I'm like, no, that makes complete sense. I said the only difference is, that if she touches the stove she's gonna burn her hand. You don't know if I'm going to heaven or hell by what you think I'm doing or what
Mm-hmm.
you. So that's all I'm asking. Stop telling people where they're gonna go if you don't know.
Yeah.
I think we can give an educated guess based on what the Bible is, but let's leave some. I said, wouldn't it be better if we told his daughter's name is Aaliyah? If we walked with Aaliyah and told her the examples of why she shouldn't touch the stove, and then also compared that to boys, or or get to know Aaliyah's temperament and say the reason you even have a desire to touch that stove, we know, is because you want to piss us off. We know that.
Yeah.
So where does that come from? All those things that to me are way more important than telling her she's gonna burn her hand. She's gonna know the first time.
Yeah.
It's a bad metaphor, and for me because, but that's why I confronted
Yeah.
him about it. I'm like, it's not the same thing. And that's maybe what the problem is, that we're taking very concrete things and passing them off as this very easy to understand truthful thing when there's so much politics and mystery and beauty
Yeah.
and richness in all of these words, but we're like, here's a little package and just take that with you and then get out of here. But we're like, don't wrestle anymore. You're like, okay.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
we've got our, systematic theology. I fit it in this box,
Right.
and it's nice, and it's got a ribbon here. You can have this, it comes self-contained, and it has all the answers here. And people who have that mentality, here's the Sam and Corinne's relationship. It's this, this, and this, and they are, libertarians or whatever. They're this. This is who they are. It's like, no, that doesn't tell me who I am. That has no idea who we are in our relationship. You can't grasp who it is because it's living, it's growing, it has history, it has emotion. There's too much to be able to just name, right? And that's what we have to understand, is the politics of Christ is like that. It's relational, like you were saying. It is this group of people being salt and light by being people who are poor in spirit, meek, mourning, people who are grieving, suffering, faithful, and hopeful. It's this, and it shows up in any place in the world, in any political system in the world. You can be a communist, socialist, Democrat, Republican, and have the politics of Jesus being foremost in your life, right? Those other things do not affect this. This is the core. And I mean, I shared I think on the first talk about this, how there's no country that can be, quote, a Christian country, just because a country by definition has boundaries, has borders, has self-preservation in mind. It has to, and it's not wrong that it does. The kingdom of God doesn't have any of those things. The kingdom of God is an open table. The kingdom of God is not self-serving or protecting. It is self-sacrificing. The kingdom of God does not fit in any of those categories. And so if we had that understanding, that's what I mean by taking our agenda and forcing Jesus to be a part of it. We're a Christian nation. They're a godless nation. It's like, again, you're not understanding what the kingdom is, and that kind of terminology. And that's where I think there's a problem, with our understanding of how we fit this into our systems.
Yeah. It's good. It's good stuff. We're at the buzzer.
We're at the buzzard.
Any questions? Oh, somebody wrote. Oh, you wrote that. You read that.
Yeah.
From our studio audience. Any questions?
All right. I concluded with the best gift the church gives to the world is reflecting the kingdom. And this should be our chief concern. It's just reflect the kingdom. That's the best thing we can do. It's better than trying to get laws passed. It's better than, preaching great sermons, having great, rallies. Just being the reflective image of the kingdom is our gift to the world. And I think that's what we need to keep focused in our minds.
That's awesome. You also know that what's that string theory thing? You heard about that? Like with the light, or when they keep on cutting atoms and atoms and the atoms turn into other things and quarks or whatever they're called.
Uh-huh.
But the theory is like if they dig deep enough that all atoms are just basically like vibrating light, that basically it's going to come down to that we are just light, that our body's just balls of light, and then that like this is like they're like we're making up the full body,
Yeah.
we are light, we are like the thing,
Yeah, gosh, so much, I mean, the reality we don't even have a full grasp of.
No,
I mean,
we're so far from everything.
But the more we find out, the more mysterious it is.
Yeah,
Right?
it just gets bigger.
Yeah.
And that's okay, because we're searching, and the progress is the process is part of the progress, and it makes it worth it. You
Yeah.
have to go through it. We have to be okay knowing we're gonna go through it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true. It's true.
Gracias.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kirk, for being here. Thank you guys for
you,
watching. Again, thank you guys for tuning in. Hope you guys can make it sometime down here and join us Sunday. Have a great rest of the week. Love you guys, and take care.
Peace.